You are standing at the edge of a forest 6,000 years ago. Behind you, a small village, thin lines of smoke, open sky. In front of you, trees without end, a wall of wood stretching from here to the sea. Your people need fields. Fields need the forest gone, and everything. The village, the harvest, whether your children eat through the next winter, comes down to the object in your hands. A stone, ground smooth, bound to a wooden handle. Here's what nobody tells you about the axe. Humans did not invent it once. We invented it again and again on opposite sides of the planet, tens of thousands of years apart. And the earliest version is older than our species itself. This is a story that stretches across 3.3 million years, 5 continents, and every kind of human that ever walked the earth. It begins before Homo sapiens existed, with a tool so successful it refused to change for 1,000,000 years, and it ends with that same tool bolted to the side of every fire truck in the modern world. So how did we get from a sharp rock to the most transformative tool in human history? It begins with a discovery that should not exist. In 2011, archaeologist Sonia Harmand was leading a survey near Lake Turkana in Kenya when a wrong turn brought her team to a site now called Lemekwi 3. What they found there rewrote the first chapter of technology. Stone tools deliberately struck cores and flakes dated to 3.3 million years ago. Read that number again. Our genus Homo appears in the fossil record around 2.8 million years ago. These tools are 500,000 years older than the first humans, which means the first tool makers were not human at all. They were creatures like Australopithecus, small-brained part-time tree climbers, closer to an upright ape than to you. Tools did not come from humans. Humans came from tools. For the better part of 1,000,000 years, the state of the art was what archaeologists call the Oldowan toolkit: hammerstones, cores, and razor-sharp flakes. And a fresh flake is genuinely impressive. It can butcher an antelope faster than a modern knife. But a flake has a hard limit. It cuts. It slices. It scrapes. It cannot chop. You cannot bring down a tree with a razor blade. Chopping needs mass, and it needs a way to deliver that mass, blow after blow, without destroying itself. Solving that problem produced the most successful tool ever made. Around 1.76 million years ago, near that same Kenyan lake, at a site called Kokisale, someone shaped the oldest known example of a completely new object, the Akulian handaxe. Teardrop-shaped, worked on both faces, a point at one end, a cutting edge running around the sides, and solid weight at the base. It could chop wood, butcher a hippopotamus, dig for roots and water, crack bone for marrow. If the Oldowan flake was a razor blade, the handaxe was a Swiss army knife. One object, every job. It was the signature invention of Homo erectus, and it spread with them out of Africa across the Middle East, Europe, and Asia until teardrops of flaked stone littered 3 continents. And then this perfect design did something no technology has done before or since. It stopped changing. For roughly 1.5 million years, the handaxe stayed the same. Same teardrop, same double face, same edge. Homo erectus made it. Homo heidelbergensis inherited it. Neanderthals were still making it. Early members of our own species were still making it. 4 different human species. One tool for perspective. Homo sapiens has existed for about 300,000 years. The handaxe design is 5 times older than we are. And here's where it gets strange. Some handaxes are too big to use. A famous specimen from Furs Platt in England is over 30 centimeters of worked flint. Pick it up and try to swing. And you understand immediately that nobody ever butchered anything with it. In 2023, archaeologists in Kent pulled another giant from the ground, nearly as long, roughly 300,000 years old. And many handaxes show obsessive, mirror-perfect symmetry precision far beyond anything cutting requires. Archaeologists Merrick Cohn and Stephen Mithen proposed an explanation that is still fought over today: the Sexy Handaxe Theory. A perfect handaxe was not a better tool. It was an advertisement proof of a sharp eye, a steady hand, and a good brain. A peacock's tail and flint. Is it true? Nobody knows. It remains one of the oldest unsolved mysteries in archaeology. But for all its perfection, the handaxe had one limitation so deep that escaping it took 1,000,000 years. Because here's something most people get wrong. The handaxe is not an axe. There is no handle. You grip the stone directly in your fist, skin against flint, and that changes everything, for a reason of pure physics. The energy of a moving blade equals half its mass times its velocity squared. Squared, that is the word that matters. Fix the same stone to the end of a stick and your arm is suddenly longer. The blade at the tip travels 2 to 3 times faster than your fist ever could, and because energy rises with the square of speed, the same stone now lands with many times the force. Same rock, same arm, a different order of violence. The handle is not an accessory. The handle is the invention, which raises an obvious question. If a stick multiplies power that dramatically, why did humans wait 1,000,000 years to attach one? Because joining stone to wood and having that joint survive a full force impact against solid oak hundreds of times in a row requires something that did not yet exist anywhere on Earth: glue. Around 200,000 years ago, at a site called Campitello in Italy, Neanderthals were distilling birch bark into tar, heating it while starving it of air, holding the temperature in a narrow band, and producing a black adhesive strong enough to bond stone to wood. Stop and consider that. Neanderthals were running a controlled chemical process before our species had set foot in Europe. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, around 70,000 years ago, modern humans pushed further. Compound adhesives, plant gum blended with red ochre, recipes adjusted ingredient by ingredient. This is the first chemistry humans ever did, and hafting demanded engineering too, because the joint is the weak point of every axe ever made. Swing hard, and at the moment of impact, the head wants to keep going while the handle stops. Tar, binding, socket, wedge every axe since is a solution to that single brutal problem. So, with glue and binding solved, where does the first true axe appear? Ground edge, wooden handle, the tool you would recognize today. Not where you think. If you are picturing Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of farming, you are off by a continent and tens of thousands of years. In 2016, archaeologist Sue O'Connor of the Australian National University announced a discovery from a rock shelter called Carpenter's Gap in the Kimberley, in northwestern Australia. A small flake from the polished edge of a groundstone axe between 44 and 49,000 years old. It is the oldest evidence of a ground edge axe anywhere on Earth, and it was made within a few thousand years of humans first reaching Australia. Japan follows, with ground edge axes around 38,000 years old. Notice what is missing from both places: agriculture. These axes were invented by hunter-gatherers tens of thousands of years before the first farm existed anywhere. The axe was never the child of farming. It was the other way around. Farming, when it finally arrived, was armed by the axe. And the axe's real revolution began when humans committed to an act that looks, frankly, insane: rubbing one stone against another for days. Grinding an axe head is brutal work hour after hour against wet sandstone and grit. Why bother when flaking an edge takes minutes? Because polish is not decoration. A flaked edge is a chain of microscopic fracture points. Every scar left by flaking is a crack waiting to spread. Grinding erases them. A ground polished edge meets wood with less friction, bites deeper, and above all survives impact after impact that would shatter its flaked ancestor. In the 1950s, Danish researchers ran one of the great experiments in archaeology. In Draved Forest, they mounted original Neolithic flint axe heads, genuine blades, thousands of years old, onto fresh handles and used them to fell living trees. The ancient blades worked. Swung in short, quick strokes, they brought down tree after tree, and the fields of Neolithic Europe stopped being a mystery. They were opened tree by stone. Here's a claim worth arguing about. The axe has reshaped more of this planet's surface than any other tool in human history. Not the plow only works on land the axe cleared first. And where there is that much demand, industry follows. 6,000 years ago, in the mountains of northwest England, there was a factory. At Great Langdale, Neolithic workers quarried a fine-grained green volcanic stone and roughed it into axe heads by the thousand. Archaeologists can fingerprint stone chemically, and the results are astonishing. Roughly a quarter of all stone axes ever found in Britain trace back to this one mountain source. Langdale blades traveled hundreds of kilometers to the far corners of the island. But here's the part no one can explain. The favored quarry sites at Langdale sit on high, exposed ledges where one slip means death, and stone of identical quality lies lower on the same mountain, safe and easy to reach. The Neolithic miners ignored it. Generation after generation, they climbed to the dangerous rock. Why? Was stone from the perilous place worth more charged with the mountain? With risk? With story? Story? We do not know. The rock cannot tell us. What is certain is that by the Neolithic, an axe could be more than a tool. It could carry meaning. And some axes carried so much meaning they were never allowed to touch wood at all. High in the Italian Alps, near Monteviso, at altitudes around 2,000 meters, there are outcrops of jadetite, a stone so hard it can barely be worked at all. Beginning around 5000 BCE, people climbed to those outcrops, pried the rock free, and ground it into axe heads polished to a mirror, a finish that took hundreds of hours of labor. And then they did not use them. Alpine jade axes have been found up to 1,800 kilometers from the mountain in Britain, in Brittany, in Scandinavia, and they are pristine. Unscratched. Never swung. They were passed hand to hand across an entire continent, then buried in graves and hoards, deliberately taken out of the world. If you think luxury was invented by modern capitalism, the Alps disagree. A Mont Viso jade axe was the Stone Age supercar that never leaves the garage value with no function except to be seen, desired, and given. 6,000 years ago, the axe had already split into two objects, one that worked and one that meant. Then a new material arrived that could do both. In 1991, hikers in the Ötztal Alps found a body melting out of a glacier. The Iceman Ötzi had been in the ice for 5,300 years, and lying near him was something priceless. The only complete prehistoric axe ever recovered. A copper blade, 99.7% pure, a handle of yew, birch tar and leather binding the same adhesive technology Neanderthals had pioneered, still on the job 200,000 years later. In 2017, researchers analyzed the lead isotopes in the blade, expecting alpine ore. The signature pointed instead to southern Tuscany, hundreds of kilometers to the south. A copper supply chain was crossing the Alps 53 centuries ago. In Ötzi's world, a copper axe marked rank, which makes his death the strangest part of the story. Ötzi was murdered, an arrowhead is still lodged in his left shoulder, and whoever killed him walked away from the single most valuable object in the valley. The axe was left with the body. A robbery where the treasure stays behind is not a robbery. So what was it? Fear? Ritual? A message someone needed the mountain to keep? 53 centuries later, the question is still open. Copper, though, has a flaw. It bends. Mix it with tin and you get bronze, and with bronze the axe splits again. One branch for trees, one branch for men. Bronze made the axe an industrial product. Smiths cast socketed axe heads a hollow throat that swallows the handle, locking head to wood far more securely than any binding. Casting meant repetition. Repetition meant thousands. And for the first time, the war axe and the work axe went their separate ways. Then, in Brittany, bronze produced a mystery archaeologists still argue about. Across the region, pits have been found packed with axe heads hoards, some containing thousands buried and never retrieved. Stranger still, many of these late Bronze Age axes contained so much lead they could never have held an edge. They were cast in the shape of axes, but they were never meant to cut. Thousands of deliberately useless axes produced, exchanged, and finally buried. One leading theory: they were not tools anymore, they were money. Value standardized in the shape of the one object everybody trusted. If that is true, the axe was currency before coins existed. But how humans invented money is a strange story of its own for another video. Then came iron, and iron did to the axe what iron does to everything. It made it cheap, and cheap is what changes the world. Iron ore is everywhere one of the most abundant elements in the Earth's crust. No tin caravans, no mountain jade, no supply chains. Any village forge could turn out an axe head, and soon every farmstead in Europe owned one. For centuries, the axe was the weapon of the man who could not afford a sword, until the Norse turned that logic upside down. Viking smiths stretched the axe into the Dane axe. A two-handed weapon with a wide, thin blade light enough to move fast and terrifying on the swing. The Mammen axe, buried with a chieftain around 970 CE, is inlaid with silver wire, a farmer's tool raised into aristocratic art. And according to the chronicles, at Stamford Bridge in 1066, a single Norse axeman held the bridge alone against the English army, cutting down man after man until he was finally speared from below. Legend? Almost certainly embellished. But notice what the story assumes, that one man with an axe could be worth an army's paws. The poor man's blade had become the hero's. Across the ocean, the axe was waiting for its final redesign. It would not come from kings. It came from farmers staring at a continent of trees. Here is the last thing most people get wrong about the axe, that it was finished, perfected somewhere in the old world and simply carried along ever after. The European felling axe of the 1600s was blade-heavy and awkward, and against the endless hardwood forests of North America, it was too slow. So colonial smiths did something quietly radical. They redesigned humanity's oldest tool. The American axe added a heavy, flat pole, a counterweight behind the handle, pulling the balance point back into the hand. The swing steadied. The bite went deeper. The recovery came faster. Axe for axe, The American pattern outchopped its European parent so clearly that it became the world standard for felling. The frontier also renamed the axe. Europeans traded compact iron axes to Native American nations, and the English language absorbed a Powhatan word for them, tomahawk, the tomahawk, an icon born from an exchange between two worlds. Swing by swing, the American axe opened a continent. Cabins, fences, farms, and, in the same motion, the erasure of forests that had stood since the ice. The 20th century finally built a machine to replace it. The machine only half succeeded. In August 1910, a firestorm the size of a state swept Idaho and Montana. The Big Burn, 3 million acres in roughly 2 days. In its path, a forest ranger named Ed Pulaski gathered his fire crew, around 45 men, and forced them into an abandoned mine tunnel as the fire roared over. By some accounts, he held them inside at gunpoint. All but a handful walked out alive. The next year, Pulaski built a tool for the fire lines. An axe blade and a grubbing hoe combined in a single head. Firefighters still carry the Pulaski today, more than a century later, on wildfire lines around the world. The chainsaw took the axe's job in the timber industry, but look at where the axe went instead. Bolted inside every fire truck on Earth. Hanging in rescue helicopters. Driven into glaciers as the mountaineer's ice axe. When a door must come down now, when a wall must open now, when a life is measured in seconds, we still reach for the oldest answer we have. The axe retreated to exactly where it began, the place where survival is decided. So go back to the edge of that forest 6,000 years ago, the polished stone axe in your hands, the wall of wood in front of you. That object carries 3.3 million years of accumulated invention. The flake, the handle, the glue, the grind. Homo erectus made its ancestors. Homo erectus is gone. Homo heidelbergensis carried it gone. The Neanderthals glued stone to wood gone. The axe outlived every species that ever made it, and it is still here, riding to house fires in the 21st century. You do not descend from people who happened to own axes. You descend from the people the axe kept alive. The forest fell, the fields fed the children, and a stone on a stick did exactly what it was invented to do.